Chapter 40 is going to be highway safety and vehicle extrication. A couple things with this. This chapter is going to revolve a lot around your personal safety, and then it's going to discuss some of the vehicle extrication techniques and just some of the basics to it. Understand that the fire department is going to usually do a lot of this, but you could work on a service where it's a hybrid service where you potentially could do some vehicle extrication. It's also a good idea to understand the basic concepts of it because you will be involved in the patient care regardless. So understanding the basic concepts of vehicle extrication, what they're going to be doing is going to help you take care of the patient, keep the patient calm, keep the patient informed. First and foremost here, highway incidents are going to be one of the biggest hazards that you face. If you work in an area that has busy roadways, interstate highways, you're going to be put at a greater risk anytime that you go out on them. You've all been on the roadway. You all see the bad drivers. It's job security for us, but it's also danger for us as well in the same sense. I've been on scenes where I've seen firemen have to dive in the ditch that are doing traffic control. I've seen police officers throw their flashlights at cars as they're driving by entirely too fast. I've seen secondary accidents because traffic doesn't slow down and you're at an accident scene and all of a sudden now a little ways back on the roadway there's another accident because somebody slowed down to gawk and somebody else didn't slow down and hit them. So it can be a danger to you. It can create chaos. It can create more patience for you. So understand what you have to do to be safe. Use kind of some of the tactics that they talk about in here. Anytime that you can get more education on any of this stuff, it's good. Responding in agencies and personnel, you just need to be aware of your responsibility and the type of hazards in the environments that you're in. So understand that it's not your role perhaps to go back to the start of the accident scene and control traffic. EMS is just one small piece of the operation on these scenes. So you need to understand what your role is. You're probably going to be up closer to the action, closer to the vehicle, because that's where the patients are going to be. Whenever you can, put yourself into a safe area outside of the danger zone so that you can have personal safety. With these highway incidents, it is going to be very common. Everybody wants to respond. Everybody wants to see these are the calls that you become an EMS provider for. The cool ones, the gory ones, these are going to be the places where you potentially see that. However, the more people that are there, the higher there is for risk of injury. So you really want to limit the manpower to only what you need to accomplish the mission. If you have 6 patients, you might need 3, 4, 5, or 6 ambulances. But if you have 6 ambulatory patients that are just requiring refusals, you really only need 1 ambulance. So have 1 ambulance respond, limit the personnel, take care of what you need as quickly as possible, and then get back off of the scene. Limit the amount of time that you're around the danger. If you're the first unit arriving, you're going to institute what's called a blocking to the work area. Now, as an ambulance, you really don't want to be the blocker because you're going to be in and out of the ambulance. You may be loading patients into the ambulance. But if you're the first unit on scene, you do want to park in a manner where you're parked at an angle with your nose facing away from the scene where the actual accident occurred, so that if a car hits your vehicle, it's going to deflect off, hopefully away from everybody. Now, in a perfect world, you're going to have a big red truck that's going to provide the blocker assistance for you. So if there's a fire engine on scene, they should park in a manner where they give you room to park in front of them. You always want to be in front so that you have access to your back doors, and those back doors are as much protected as they can be through the blocking patterns. If you do have to block lanes of traffic, you want to clear them as soon as possible because, like I talked about a couple slides ago, you can have these trickle down effects where you have multiple accidents as traffic starts to pile up. So Get in, get your job done, get out, open the roadway back up. Work with fire. Police are going to play an integral role in this as well. The last slide is going to show you kind of a picture of a limited access highway. So it's a two lane road, not much room on either side of the roadway that you could really put apparatus and vehicles to keep things opened up. So you're going to be really limited on getting the ability to get in and get out. So what you really need to do is limit the apparatus and response units to only the primary and the first due units. So uh, an ambulance, maybe a fire truck, so that they can provide you assistance, shut the road down if need be. A lot of times in these situations, the road is just going to have to get closed. The traffic's going to have to get rerouted around until you can get the scene clear and everything moved out. Limited access highways provide their own set of difficulties and challenges. So you're going to have to do the best you can. There's a lot of these are just going to be situational, depending on what you have, where the vehicles are located, how many patients you have. So work with your incident commander so that you have access in and out. The worst thing that can happen is you have a critical patient, you get the ambulance in, and everybody else piles in around you and you can't get out. So you have to be thinking kind of 3 steps ahead. All right, the patient's got to get extricated. That's the next step. The patient's got to get loaded. That's the next step. I got to be able to get the ambulance out of here. That's the next step. You got to be thinking, how am I going to be able to get the ambulance out of here? So limiting access is really the best way to do this. On these limited access highways, you're going to need to park in a single file in the same direction just to minimize the congestion. Like I said, you may have to have a fire apparatus go further down the road to the next intersection so that they can close the roadway off, detour traffic around, while you have another apparatus the other direction up at the next roadway, closing things off, detouring things around. So it can take a lot of personnel, a lot of apparatus to efficiently and effectively run these scenes. Like I said, though, it's all situational. For the most part, as an EMS responder, you are not going to be command. However, if you are the first unit on scene, you are going to have to establish command, and there are a couple things that you want to do with this. So you want to confirm the exact location of the incident with the dispatch center. You're going to want to probably notify incoming units of what they have so that they can prepare a little bit. If all the patients are out of the vehicle, that's way different circumstance than you have 2 patients trapped in the vehicle. So if you're the first unit on scene as the EMS provider, radio back to the fire, hey, I have a vehicle on its roof, 2 patients still inside the vehicle, possible extrication needed. They're going to know when they get there to start prepping for that. So communication is key in these situations. Now, as soon as you can hand off command to somebody else, hand it off so that you can focus on patient care and what your job really needs to be. But there is the potential that if you're the first unit on scene, you may have to establish it, get things started. Use the apparatus to institute an upstream blocking to protect the work area. So think of it like a river. Everything floats down the river. So you want to go up the stream and you want to provide some sort of blocking pattern. Like I said earlier, if you're the first unit on scene, take one lane, kind of park at an angle. So if a vehicle hits you, they either hit you and deflect away down into the ditch, or they hit you and deflect back into the roadway away from you. But your job is to protect you and the scene that you're on. Rescue trucks arriving to perform extrication should be positioned downstream of the initial blocking vehicle. So there's kind of a whole system on how you should park, where you should put the vehicles. So you should have a blocking vehicle upstream. The working units should be slightly downstream. So the ambulance, you want it downstream so that you can come up onto the roadway, load the patient in the back of the ambulance, take off further downstream. You might have to whip a U-turn or however you get to the hospital from there. Same thing with the fire apparatus performing extrication. You want them downstream so they have full access to their equipment. They can easily access the scene. However, like I said, it is important to have that vehicle upstream blocking just to protect everything. So when you're blocking, like we talked about, as an ambulance, you're not going to be the blocker. But what the blocking should do is create 1.5 to potentially 2 lanes of blockage. You want to give yourself a cushion. Don't just block to where you're kind of on a straight line with your apparatus, because there's always the potential that a vehicle misses the blocking vehicle and somehow clips your apparatus. You want to try to avoid that. So that blocker needs to take 1.5 to 2 lanes and really do a good job of blocking the scene. Now, if you are in the apparatus that's blocking, we talked about the parking aspect of it, but the other thing to think about is park it so that your wheels, turn your wheels so that if a vehicle does strike that blocking vehicle, it pushes the blocking vehicle away from the scene. If you have your wheels pointed towards the scene or towards the back of your ambulance and they get hit hard enough, all it's going to do is steer that blocking vehicle where you don't want it to go. So that's another thing to think about, is the positioning of the tires in that vehicle that's blocking. Now, as other apparatus are arriving, and like we talked about, this could take a number of units to efficiently run this operation. What you want to do is leave space immediately next to the crash for vehicle extrication units. You need them to be able to get in, do their job, get your patients out so that you can get them to the ambulance. You want to position the ambulances and command vehicles downstream from the crash. This is going to allow safer patient loading and rapid departure from the scene. So when you park your ambulance, if somebody's already there that's incident command, you want to radio to them prior to getting on scene. Where do you want us to park? Okay, but when you're parking, you need to think ahead of, how can I access my cot? How can I access my equipment? And then how can I depart the scene? So you want to position your ambulance in a manner that you can effectively do all of those things. When you arrive on scene, another thing that you have to think about is just safely exiting your vehicle. You want to make sure that your safety comes first. So you want to be checking to make sure that traffic has stopped. You want to look and listen prior to exiting. Perhaps roll your window down so that you can maybe hear things coming up on you. Use your mirrors, use any tools you have so that you can safely exit. You want to look out for oncoming traffic. Whenever possible, you want to exit on the side away from oncoming traffic, which means you have the side door on your ambulance. Generally speaking, if you're in the back of the ambulance, that's going to be the best exit point, because you're usually parked on the same side of the road as the incident. Now, if you're parked on the opposite side of the road as the incident to where that door swings into traffic, if you're in the back of the ambulance, it may be safer to exit out the rear of the ambulance. Now, if you're a front seat driver, front seat passenger, somebody's going to be put on the side of oncoming traffic. So you just have to, like I said, look and listen. Make sure that you're exiting when it's safe. It may take a couple seconds for you to be able to get out and effectively exit your vehicle. The other thing before you exit, and it's going to talk about it later in the slides, make sure that you have your approved safety vest on, so that way traffic can better visualize and see you when you're on the roadway. It is a law in Illinois. I'm sure that it's required in multiple states that you, if you're on a highway, you do have to wear a safety vest. So keep those things in mind. And as I just said, here's the slide talking about it. All responders should be in full protective clothing, or at a minimum an ANSI approved safety vest and helmet. So the safety vest is really the thing that you're going to see most often in the real world. However, it is required on ambulances to have safety helmets. Uh, and it is a good idea, especially if you're around the extrication component of a vehicle crash, that you have the proper protective clothing. They do make good extrication jumpsuits that you can just step into, zip them up. They work really well. Firemen will generally be in their full turnout gear for this as they're doing the extrication process. Being seen, if you're the first unit on scene and you have them in your vehicle, take a couple minutes, set some flares out just to warn oncoming traffic that you're there. Do whatever you can to provide maximum safety when you're on these scenes. So flares every 10 feet and then diagonal it back off so that traffic will hopefully get over. If you have traffic cones, use those. As fire departments get there, they're going to usually have some other safety mechanisms. They may have a crash accident pop-up sign that they can deploy further down the road to start warning people. They'll usually put people at the start, kind of pushing traffic over with a stop and a slow sign, kind of like you would see in a construction area. So utilize your resources as they arrive. Mainly put your safety first if you're the first unit on the scene. Night operations can be especially dangerous for you just because the visibility is not there. So when you arrive on scene, you want to make sure to shut off the vehicle's headlights and any of the white response lights if you can. A lot of the newer vehicles are being developed so that you can shut these lights off separately from the red and amber lights. There's also some of the newer vehicles will have dimming features to dim those, even the red and amber lights, because the new LED technology is so bright at night that it can almost be blinding as you approach the scene, to where when that thing flashes and you're looking at it, all of a sudden now you can't see anything around you if you're an ongoer, and it becomes dangerous for everybody. So you have to take some responsibility in your own safety and things that you do, but you also have to take some responsibility in making it easier for oncoming traffic to be able to pass you in a safe manner as well. So the best combination of lights to provide maximum visibility, leave those red and amber lights on. If you can, dim them. Turn your headlights off, turn your fog lights off, and then the traffic directional boards, make sure that they're operating. So if you have the arrow stick on the back of your ambulance, some ambulances have those, make sure that you turn that on, pointing traffic which way you want them to go. Now we're going to move into vehicle extrication. And like we discussed, you may be on a unit that is responsible for portions of the vehicle extrication. You have some simple tools, generally speaking, on an ambulance to help with extrication. Maybe a tool to help pop a door if it can be a simple pop. Tools to break out windows so that you can access the patient. However, for the most part, the detailed in-depth extrication, the use of the jaws of life, the use of rams, the use of airbags, things like that are generally going to be done with the rescue unit, the people that have specialized training in it. With today's vehicles, today's technology, extrication has become a very dangerous component of rescue. You have electric cars with all the dangers of the batteries. All cars have countless airbags that you have to be concerned about. Even you as an EMS provider need to understand the dangers of EMS bags when they haven't deployed, of airbags when they haven't deployed, and what you need to do. So kind of the phases that you go through with vehicle extrication, you got to prepare, you got to pre-plan, you got to look and figure out what is the safest, quickest, most efficient manner to get this patient extricated out of the vehicle. You need to size up the situation. You need to recognize and manage hazards. So you need to do a 360 of the vehicle and see what hazards there are. You need to stabilize that vehicle prior to entering. This is a big one, especially if you're an EMS provider and you're the first unit on scene. Don't just go run and jump in the vehicle with the patient because you don't want to put yourself in harm's way and become part of the problem. And then there's the gaining access portion to the patient. A few more steps here is going to be providing primary patient assessment and rapid trauma assessment. That is something that you may do before they're extricated from the vehicle as they're getting the extrication equipment prepped. As long as the vehicle is safe, you can enter the vehicle, do a rapid trauma assessment, see what you got. This would allow you to pre-plan some things while they're extricating, perhaps getting IVs ready with your ALS crew, perhaps calling for a helicopter if need be, whatever the situation um, would dictate. There's the disentanglement of the patient. There's the actual immobilization and extrication of the patient from the vehicle. Um, One thing at a minimum that you may want to do if your procedures and policies, standing medical orders dictated, is to get that C-collar in place, try to at least get their neck immobilized so that way as they're getting extricated out, you're not worried about doing more damage if they do have a neck injury. And then once they're extricated, there's the providing the assessment care and transport to the most appropriate hospital. Again, most appropriate hospital in these situations are going to be dictated by who can handle the trauma situations. So you may have a hospital 10 minutes away, but they're just a very basic emergency room. They don't keep a lot of patients at the hospital. You may need to go 20 miles to a hospital that has the trauma designation so that way they could be better cared for. And then you basically close out the rescue by terminating it. So once everything's done, the patient's extricated, the vehicle has been secured, you terminate the rescue. So to prepare for the rescue, it's going to take a combination of training, practice, and the right protective gear and tools. When you're done with this basic class, you are by no means trained to go out and extricate somebody from a vehicle. It's going to take a lot of specialized training in different areas, like we talked about, all the different vehicles, and all the different size, shapes. You have semis, you have, you know, trains, everything. They all take specialized training. So if you want to get into the rescue portion of emergency services, it's going to take ample more training beyond what you learn in this EMT basic class. We're preparing you for patient care. However, it's important to understand the concepts of rescue, of extrication. So it is covered in this textbook, but you really have to do a lot more to be proficient in it. The availability of the training is going to kind of depend as to what kind of rescues are most likely required in your area. So if you start your job in the Midwest, you're going to be trained on A, B, C, and D. Now, if you move to the Southeast in Florida, you're going to be trained on a whole different concept based on what they have around there. So it's a lot of situational stuff when it comes to this. We're trying to give you the basic concepts that you would use wherever you go. And then if you want to grow your knowledge, you're going to have to do more specialized training from there. Now, when you arrive, you're going to have to size up the situation. So you need to conduct a good size up to evaluate the hazards, but you also need to address the need for additional resources. So things to think about: how many patients are involved? What's their priority? Are they all out of the vehicle, or do you have unconscious patients in the vehicle? What's the mechanism of injury? Is this a simple accident that maybe you take them to get evaluated, but there really should be no serious injuries? Or is this, a horrific crash where two cars hit head on going 60 miles an hour and there's massive damage to the vehicles and the patients are severely injured? Are there additional ambulances needed? Are there additional resources needed? For example, where we are located, we are about 20 minutes from the nearest trauma center. However, it is a level 2 trauma center, which means they can do a lot, but there are certain things they can't do. So we are probably 65, 70 miles from the closest level 1 trauma center. So if your patient has stable vital signs, it may be advantageous for the patient's well-being to say, you know what, I'm going to take the extra few minutes. I'm going to call the helicopter. I'm going to have the helicopter land because they're going to take them straight to the level 1 trauma center. And that's the care that they need, which is okay. Utilize your medical control if you have questions with this, but figure out what additional resources you need. And then you have to figure out what's the extent of the patient's entrapment. This is also important from that same aspect as we just discussed. Even if it's 20 minutes to the nearest hospital, that's like a 6-minute flight for a helicopter. So if their entrapment is going to take 25 minutes to get them extricated, it may be advantageous if they have serious injuries to say, I need a helicopter here, because as soon as they get out of the vehicle, I can load them in the helicopter and they're there in 6 minutes instead of 20 minutes. So these are all things you have to think about when you size up the situation so that you can stay 2, 3, 4, 5 steps ahead of the game to provide the most effective, efficient care for your patient. So talking now about protective gear for the EMS responder, going to be a handful of slides here on it. The thing to think about is your own personal safety. So if you're at a crash and you're working in that inner circle in the danger zone, you really need to be in full protective turnout gear to have maximum protection. So that's going to be impermeable um, clothing that won't just cut or tear, um, something that's going to give you more protection, boots that give you added protection, eye protection, helmets, protection on your hands beyond your rubber gloves. We're talking about uh, something that, again, is impermeable, that's going to allow you maximum protection. However, a lot of ambulance services don't provide the full gamut of protection that you may need. So if your service does not provide what you feel is the protective gear, and you can refer to your textbook and refer to some of the NFPA standards, then it might be a good idea for you to purchase your own. Yeah, it stinks that you have to spend your own money to buy something for work. It's a tax write-off, um, but you have to put your safety first. So that may be going and buying the zip-up extrication suit so that you have it. If you have your protective gear, even if it's what's provided on the ambulance, use it. It's for your own safety. It's for your own good. You can't take care of the patient if you end up getting hurt. So make sure to put yourself first, protect yourself. Whenever you're working in traffic, wear a helmet. Again, it's for your own safety. May be cumbersome, may feel like it's a bit overkill, but all it takes is one incident, and you should know by now, going through this entire EMT textbook, if you squish your brain, nothing else matters. So protect that noggin, wear the helmet. Make sure you're visible. Wear that safety vest to enhance that visibility. Make sure it's the ANSI approved safety vest. If something happens and you get hit and they press charges against the person that hit you, they can be at total fault. But if you didn't have your safety vest on, that's going to give their defense team something to stand on and say, hey, he would have seen him if he was wearing his safety vest. So wear your safety vest. It's for your own good. During the actual extrication process, you may need to enhance what you're wearing. You're going to have a significant increased risk of exposure to potentially flame. Hopefully you're not in there if that's the case, but you do have that potential. Glass, fluids, other sharp objects, equipment that the fire department's using. So you want to make sure that uh, you're wearing the maximum protective gear to protect yourself. That might be EMS turnout gear which would be similar to fire turnout gear. It could be the vest style extrication suit like I talked about. Make sure this includes your helmet and your eye protection. And maybe you have a newer style helmet that has the eye protection that flips down. That's perfectly acceptable, but you want to make sure that you have both of them. Just match what the others are wearing and look at other workers within the industry. If the guy doing extrication puts his helmet on, pulls his face shield down, has his full turnout gear on, then you shouldn't be next to him or inside the vehicle unless you have at least similar protective gear. And just to kind of repeat here, at a minimum, helmet, head protection, eye protection, hand protection, beyond your rubber gloves, we're talking about some sort of extrication glove or fire glove that's going to give you added protection, and then body protection, whether it's turnout gear or like we talked about, the extrication suit. Now, the next thing to think about is safeguarding your patients. So your patient is in the vehicle, they're getting ready to extricate them. What do? Well, you need to protect your patient from the same things that you would be protected from, the flying glass, the extrication equipment, the sharp objects as they're bending and moving things around the patient to gain access. Do what you can to protect them. So there are a number of different things you can do. It's whatever your creativity and whatever resources you have allows. But there's such things as aluminized rescue blankets. There's the vinyl coated paper tarpaulins. There's wool blankets. You can use short spine boards and perhaps even long spine boards to kind of build a wall to protect your patient. Whatever you can do, you can use, another fireman on scene that's maybe driving the apparatus. Hey, we need your turnout coat so we can put it over top of the patient to protect them. Whatever the case may be. But it is important to understand that you do have to take a little bit of time to safeguard your patient. You're there to take care of them and prevent them from further injury. So you don't want them to get further injury while they're getting extricated out of the vehicle. A couple more things here is hard hats, safety goggles. Those are common sense things, but the other things to think about, hearing protection, dusk masks, thermal masks, as they're cutting on the vehicle and doing their job to extricate them, they're going to be creating chaos around the patient. There could be glass popping off. There could be dust flying around. So think about those other things. Not to mention that that equipment's loud. So provide them hearing protection. And then finally here, the emotional support for the patient. You want to communicate to the patient what's going on, what's going to happen, so that they're not surprised. They're going to be terrified already. They've been in an accident and they're injured. Now you're going to throw a blanket over them to protect them, so they're going to be put into a dark environment, hearing a bunch of noises and chatter of things that they've never heard before. So it is going to be a terrifying experience for your patient. Communicate, provide them emotional support. If it's possible to have somebody in the vehicle with them and allow them protection, have somebody in the vehicle with them, kind of up in their ear, talking them through the whole situation, so that they do have that emotional support. Moving on to a couple slides on managing traffic. The ambulance and its warning lights are the first form of traffic control. In a perfect world, that's enough. You, People see the warning lights and they move out and around and everybody's safe. In a real world, that's not the case. People are distracted. People don't know what they're supposed to do. People are in a hurry and they're just driving too fast through these scenes, whatever the case may be. Um, but the warning lights are your first form of traffic control. As soon as you can, position other warning devices around the area, whether that's flares, cones. As other vehicles get on scene, let them kind of take that over and provide blocking and distance, things like that. When you're using the flares for traffic control, it's obviously going to be something that can cause fire. So you want to look for and avoid any spilled fuel, any dried vegetation, anything that can combust and start a fire, especially at the road's edge where it can trickle down through the ditch. You need to avoid. Do not throw these flares out of the moving vehicle. Step it off. You're going to go about every 10 feet, and then position these flares at the edge of the danger zone as soon as you can. There should be more than just you and the ambulance. So this is where a little bit of pre-planning as you're driving to the scene helps. So you guys can designate, hey, you go down to the scene, start triaging the patient. I'm going to set out the flares, get traffic routed away from the scene. So these are things that you talk about before you get there. So that way, when you get there, you can be effective. Take a handful of these flares and start at your ambulance, walking towards the oncoming traffic, setting them down as you go. Position that flare every 10 feet if possible to channel vehicles into the unblocked lane. If that collision's occurred on a 2-lane road, position the flares in both directions. And you're really going to need traffic control on this because on a 2-lane road, if you have a vehicle that decides to go out and around and another vehicle's coming towards the scene, it can create secondary accidents and just create mass chaos. But if you're the first unit on scene, you have to do the best you can with what you have. Be careful when lighting these flares. Make sure to not burn yourself. You know, there is a little bit of a danger when using the flares, albeit minimal danger. And then never use these flares as a traffic wand. So don't go back there and start waving cars over with your flare. Flares are meant to be lit and put on the ground, and then you move to the next one. Hopefully you have a traffic wand. Most of the fire departments that are going to control the traffic are going to have traffic wands, where it's the flashlight with the long orange cone on the end of it, basically. And then they can kind of point traffic to where they need them to go. Airbags. They are great when they work. They're designed to inflate on impact, take that kinetic energy and spread it out, and minimize the trauma to the body. Since the inception of airbags, they have saved countless lives with what they can do. It's not uncommon when you get there that you're going to see maybe a little bit of light smoke in the vehicle if you're there relatively soon after the accident. And there may be some powdery substances. That's normal from the airbag deployment. Now, the thing as an EMS provider, as a rescuer, that can cause extreme danger to you is when the airbags do not deploy. So when they do not deploy, there's still the potential that they could pop off. For whatever reason, the sensor didn't send them off. So you need to be very cautious when you're on the scene of a vehicle that has not had the airbags deploy. Don't stick your head, your body, any place where that airbag could deploy and cause damage to you. What you need to do is the fire department will cut the negative battery terminal, and that will kill the system. Now, it usually kills power to the full vehicle within 2 to 3 minutes, but these airbags are set up so that it can take upwards sometimes of 30 minutes for the airbag system to completely disarm. So regardless if the battery cable's been cut or not, your safety comes first. Be very cautious when working around airbags that haven't deployed. If they've deployed, you're kind of in the safe zone now. One thing that to think about is, especially with the steering wheel, is kind of lift the airbag up, look for those deformities on the steering wheel to determine if maybe the vehicle, the patient struck the vehicle steering wheel, or if it could have caused other damage. Airbags are every place these days. There's airbags down the sides, there's airbags across the top, there's airbags in the front, there's airbags in the rear, there's airbags down by your legs. They're even creating vehicles with airbags on the outside with the new technology that, it senses to keep you in the lane, senses an oncoming stopped vehicle. Same concept. It senses a vehicle strike and it deploys the airbag outside the vehicle to dissipate that kinetic energy outside the vehicle and hopefully even prevent damage to the vehicle. So airbags are every place. Just be very cautious as an EMS provider when you're working around them. Something else that's becoming common on these vehicles are energy absorbing bumpers. So basically, what it is it's a mechanism to prevent damage to the vehicle, to where the bumper can get pushed in, and then there's a system that springs the bumper back out. However, now if you notice that the bumper shock absorber system has been compressed or loaded, and the bumper's kind of pushed in and hasn't released, be cautious, because if it releases and you're standing up against it, it's going to be at knee height and it's going to destroy your knee. Um, so always, if you are worried about this bumper being loaded, um, kind of come at it from a diagonal or perpendicular. Um, if you're in close proximity to fires, always approach the vehicle at a 45-degree angle, not head on. Um, if there's going to be an attempt at either fire suppression or patient care. So these are all just, again, mechanisms for your own personal safety. With the newer style vehicles, the technology on them is always changing. By the time you get done with this class and take the test, there's probably going to be some new technology that isn't discussed in your textbook. So, as continuing education, always try to stay up on the technology of the vehicles so that you can always make sure that you have the safest approach when you're kind of entering these scenes of vehicle accidents. So, talking about spectators, and you're going to have them. If you're on busy roadways, you're obviously going to have vehicles passing. If you have to stop traffic, they're going to pile up and you're going to have people watching. You're going to have ambulance chasers that hear that the ambulance fire department go out, so they want to drive out and see what's going on and gawk as they go by. They bring plenty of hazards. The more people that are there, the more opportunity there are for injury. We've been talking on countless slides of your own personal safety, but now anybody else that's there has that same safety affect. However, the average spectator hasn't been trained like you have. So these people, they can interfere with the rescue and the emergency care efforts, in addition to traffic, and they can create secondary accidents, things of that nature. However, you may have somebody that just comes in and wants to nose in and thinks that they can help and thinks that they know more than you, and they're just going to get in the way. Sometimes spectators can be helpful. If you have an off-duty fireman, an off-duty paramedic, an off-duty, I've had physicians on scene. They can be helpful, but you know what? They can also get in the way. I've been on a scene where we had a patient we had to intubate on the highway. A guy was there that was a doctor, went on and on about how he was a doctor, and I'm like, okay, great. Like, here, do you want to intubate this patient? Well, I'm a pediatrician. Okay, he has no idea how to intubate an adult. So really, at that point, he kind of was getting in the way more than anything. Um, you will be put in the limelight with these spectators too. I've been on scenes where I've had people standing on their roofs of their vehicles with their cameras out, taking pictures, taking videos of everything that you do. So be professional, do your job, understand that it might get put out on the web and you may be a YouTube sensation or TikTok sensation, whatever the case may be. Um, so maintain your professionalism. If you do have somebody there that's responsible looking, or somebody there that you can always put them to work. Give them some barricade tape. Don't put them in an unsafe position. Don't give them the flashlight and say, hey, go down and direct traffic. But if there are things they can do in a safe manner to help you, put them to work, because that's one less thing you have to do, and then you can focus on something else. Some slides on electrical hazards, and you will see these because a lot of times high voltage lines can be involved in the accident. Vehicle goes off the roadway into the ditch, strikes telephone pole, knocks telephone pole over, brings a high power line down. It's really not that uncommon. There are obviously plenty of concerns and hazards when it comes to this. Assume the entire area around the wires are dangerous. Assume that they're live until somebody tells you that they're not. If a conductor is touching the vehicle, it can energize the entire metal portion of the vehicle as you approach it. So you need to be very cautious. And your ordinary protective clothing that we've talked about on a handful of slides here, they don't protect you from an electrocution. So you can go up there and all it takes is one little touch and that's the end. You could be done. So be very cautious. Now, it is also very difficult because you may get on scene and see that there is somebody dying in the vehicle. And if there's a power line across it, you have no choice but to stand there. And they may end up dying. You may watch them die, but you cannot put yourself in harm's way to try to prevent it. If they die, it's terrible. If you and your two partners die trying to get to them, it's tragic. So you always have to put your own safety first. You're not a professional in electricity, so you have to wait until somebody tells you that the scene is safe. So if there is a broken utility pole with wires down, it's very dangerous. You need to set up a large safety zone and discourage the occupants in the vehicle from leaving if they're able to. You also have to make sure that uh, none of the responders approach or touch the vehicle. So it just takes good communication, good common sense. Okay, now once you've kind of determined that, find the nearest pole you can that has a number on it. Usually these power poles every so often will have a number on it, and that's basically like a mile marker for the electric company to say, this is where I need to go for this pole. They can punch in that number in the computer system, and it tells them exactly where it's at so they can notify their responders where they need to go to. And just quickly kind of continuing with the same concept, don't attempt to move these down wires. You don't know if they're live or not. Don't risk it. Stand in a safe place until the power company gets there, disconnects the power, cuts the wire. Hopefully that safe place is close enough that you can at least communicate to the people inside the vehicle if there are people in there that are able to communicate. Now, if there's a broken utility pole with the wires intact, park that ambulance outside the danger zone. Understand that, you might need to park a pole or two away just because the strain of one broken pole is now pulling tension on the two poles that are connected to it. And if there's any fracture or defects in those poles, it could potentially snap those poles as well and drop them. So give yourself a large enough area that you're in a safe zone. Notify your dispatcher of the situation and get the appropriate people coming, which in this case is probably going to be the power company. At this point, you're going to basically be a bystander. So you want to stay outside that danger zone until the power company gets there and they verify or de-energize the the wire and tell you that it's safe for you to go in. So what do you do at this point? Protect the scene. Keep spectators and other emergency personnel out of the danger zone. Now it's all about safety until you get the all clear. So really your only goal is scene safety and protecting everybody around the scene. Okay, a pad mounted transformer is basically going to be a metal box of some sort. It may be smaller, it may be larger, just depends on the transformer size inside of it. But these are going to be more for power lines that run underground, that they have to basically run that transformer above the ground. So if one of these are involved, you need to immediately notify the power company, request them to respond. Don't touch the transformer case or the vehicle that's touching it because you don't know if what's got power running through it at this point. Warn other personnel as they get there, hey, it's an unsafe scene. We don't know if there's electricity to that. We've got power company on the way to take care of it. And then again, kind of like the last slide, it's all about safety of the perimeter. Be at a safe enough distance that you don't have to worry about things, hopefully close enough you can communicate. Let the power company get there, take care of the problem, but your goal at that point is to keep everybody safe, keep them away from the scene. Let's talk about vehicle fires now. Again, you're the EMS provider, you're not the fire suppression team. So your role in this is hopefully going to be minimal. However, if you're the first unit on scene and there's a vehicle fire, you're going to want to try to do what you can, if you can, to extinguish that fire. So if it's a small fire when you get there, a lot of times just those 15 or 20 pound class ABC dry chemical fire extinguishers, which you're required to have in your ambulance, I believe 2 of them, those will extinguish almost anything that's burning. If the fire is in the engine compartment, do not attempt to extinguish it unless the foot is open, or to open the safety latch. So if the hood's popped and you can poke the extinguisher nozzle in there and kind of spray it around, that's fine. But you don't necessarily want to try to lift the hood up because you don't know it may burst into a big ball of flames in your face. So you just have to do the best you can with the situation that is given to you. Now, in that situation where the hood is on fire, the passenger compartment's not, if you go all the way back to lifting and moving, this is a case where you use those emergency lifts. So it doesn't matter life or limb at this point. If you do nothing, they're going to burn up. So grab them, pull them out of the vehicle, get them to a safe distance, regardless of injury. If the fire is in the passenger compartment or the trunk, obviously this poses an immediate threat to your patient. However, there are some things that you do need to think about. So you need to apply that fire extinguisher sparingly until the occupants can be freed. The material that comes out of the fire extinguisher is extremely hazardous. So if you just completely douse the inside of the vehicle in it, you can actually cause damage to your patient versus if it's just, something that's a really small fire where it's like a squirt and you got the fire out, that's what you need to do. So the smallest amount of product possible to put the fire out and get the patients out of the vehicle as quickly as possible. Again, more than likely emergency extrication at this point. If it's the trunk, same principles apply to this. And same principles apply to it kind of as the hood too. If it's not open, it's going to be a little bit more challenging for you to access. If there's a fire underneath the vehicle, you kind of want to sweep that extinguisher back and forth on the flames underneath of the passenger compartment to extinguish it. It's going to be a little bit more challenging because it can work up underneath the mechanics of the underneath of the vehicle and get tucked up in there, so it can be a difficult access with the fire extinguisher. But try to sweep it back and forth, and it'll hopefully kind of push that fire out and blow it out. Truck fires carry their own variety of dangers. When we're talking truck fires here, we're talking like box trucks, semi trucks, anything that's carrying other materials. Again, if you have to, use your ABC extinguisher. Best you can to extinguish it. It's only going to go so far, and these vehicles are going to be larger, more flammable with the contents that are in them. And then burning truck tires are especially dangerous. As the gas heats up, it expands, it can cause that tire to blow, and it can do a lot of damage to you as a provider if you're too close to it. So never stand directly in front of a truck wheel when it's on fire, because the dynamics of how it's going to blow out, that's going to be the most dangerous spot. Understand that flames can spread to the vehicle's body and the cargo. The tire can explode. Just be prepared. Honestly, if there's nobody in the vehicle and you're the EMS provider, call for the fire department. It's their job. Don't put yourself in harm's way. If you have to rescue somebody, these are the situations where, yeah, you might have to do this. So when it comes to disabling that vehicle's electrical system, basically you have to disconnect the negative cable from the battery, and that will kill power to the vehicle. You can cut it. If you got the right tools, you can just take it off. Whatever the case may be, that's how you disconnect the electrical system. There are advantages to this. There are also going to be a few disadvantages to it. We've talked about the advantages of it when it comes to things like the airbags. If somebody hits the key and turns the key and it's in gear, it's going to pop forward. Whereas if the power's been cut to the vehicle, it's going to prevent that from happening. However, there are some things that you have to take in mind before cutting the power. Most vehicles are powered door locks, the windows, the seat adjustment mechanisms, and these are all tools that can be useful for you um, in extricating the patient. If they got power seats and it's a 5 foot nothing lady that's up on top of the steering wheel, which isn't uncommon, you can move that seat as far back as you want to give yourself just that little bit more room to work. Once you cut the power to the car, you can't do that anymore. So there are some things that you have to keep in mind when you're cutting the power. Now we're going to shift over to stabilizing the vehicle. And when it comes to vehicle stabilization, it's important for you to understand the dangers of a vehicle that's not stable. And if you enter a vehicle that's not stable, the potential hazards that you face now that you've put yourself in harm's way. So you always want to make sure that the vehicle is stable, especially before entering it. So if the vehicle's on its wheels, it's a pretty simple process of turn off the engine, put a step chock on 3 sides, um, and that will be enough to stabilize the vehicle. I've also been in classes where it talks about let the air out of all 4 tires. It comes down and sits on the rims. It makes it so it won't roll. There are some other things you can do, but the basic concept is step chalk 3 sides. The next slide, if you look close, will show you what a step chalk looks like. It's basically a stair step system up that you can slide it underneath the vehicle until it kind of gets in there tight. And then the theory is it won't shift around off of that. If the vehicle's on its side, it's going to be more challenging to stabilize. So you may have to use ropes, cribbing, stabilizer bars. The next slide will show you what the stabilizer bars look like. They do work really well. I mean, I've been on scenes where the tow trucks got there and the tow trucks hooked onto it and kind of pulled tension on it to kind of keep it from shifting around. Again, we're just giving you a basic knowledge of things that you need to do or look for. This is going to be more specialized training to appropriately do this, but this is the basics. If the vehicle's on its roof, uh, utilize maybe 4x4 wood blocks. Sometimes you can use those step chalks again. There are different tools, strategies to stabilize it once it's on its roof. Again, very basic concept here from an EMS standpoint. Gaining access to your patient through the vehicle has challenges depending on a number of situations. So that there's going to basically be 2 concepts here. Is it a simple access, which means check the door or the window to see if they can be opened. And kind of the mindset to think about is try before you pry. Um, don't just assume that you're going to have to get the jaws of life in there on every single car accident, because more times than not, you're going to be able to go over, you're going to be able to open the door, and you're going to be able to extricate the patient without really doing a whole lot to the vehicle itself. But there are going to be those situations where it's a complex access, where you're going to have to use tools and specialized equipment to gain access to the patient. Again, as an EMS provider, this is more of a specialty, so you would have to get further training beyond what you learn here to be able to operate this equipment and understand the concepts of gaining access to vehicles based on different types and styles of crashes. One thing as an EMS provider, if you're the first on scene that you may do, is you may break the glass in the side or the rear window. You want to do it as far from the patient as possible, but you can do this to gain access to the patient, or potentially, all cars these days lock automatically. So when you get there, if the patient's unconscious, doors are going to be locked. How do you gain access? Pop a window, unlock a door, gain access that way. So that is one thing as an EMS provider that you may end up having to do. On these complex ones, there are going to be all kinds of different strategies. But basically, step 1 and 2, gain access by disposing of the doors and the roof. Sometimes it's as simple as you got to pop one door off, cut the hinges. That gives you your access to the patient. Sometimes it's you got to cut the doors off. You got to hinge posts so that they fold down. You got to cut the A posts, which are at the front of the vehicle that hold your windshield in, and the B posts, and roll that roof back. Sometimes you have to roll the steering wheel up off the patient. It can get pretty complex, so you have to have the specialized training, but it gives you access to the vehicle's interior. It's going to create a large exit and give you the most flexibility in how you want to extricate your patient. It's going to provide fresh air and help cool that patient if it's hot out. However, the flip is true too. If it's a cold 20-degree night and you're cutting things off, now you got to be worried about cold getting to your patient. But it's going to give you quick access to the critical patient, and it's going to help you improve their survivability and decrease their morbidity. So going back a ways though, you have to remember this takes time. You're not going to do this in 2 minutes. So be thinking a few steps ahead. Hey, they're going to extricate through this disentanglement process of taking the doors off, taking the roof off. It's going to take them 12, 15 minutes to do this. I'm 25 minutes from a hospital. Maybe I should call the helicopter. So these are the things you need to think about through the process. And then step 3 is disentanglement occupants by displacing the front end. Kind of talked about it, rolling the dash, using the specialty tools to gain access. The one thing if you're working on this end of the vehicle to extricate them is you don't want to cut that steering wheel or the airbag wiring if the airbag hasn't deployed, because you don't want to risk cutting something and firing it off, potentially hurting a responder or even potentially the patient more so. And that's the end of this chapter. So one thing I will say, utilize your textbook as you go through this. There are a lot of good images and descriptive items in the textbook on this chapter, help you understand it a little bit more. So make sure you're utilizing that as you're going through it to understand kind of some of the stuff that's being talked about a little bit more. Go through your chapter review. If you have questions, let us know. Again, this is a chapter that's a lot of knowledge-based information, a lot of things that you're not going to do, but a lot of things that you need to know how it's done, why it's done, so that way you have a better understanding as you communicate to your patient. You have a better understanding of the timelines. But as always, a lot of this chapter is your safety comes first.